All anyone can talk about this year is the fallout from the analog trend. We're putting down our phones and replacing it with books and hobbies and dumb tech. And everyone's got a hot take about what that means and who's doing it performatively and whether it's gonna last or not. But what I don't think anyone's talked about yet is how this big shift to analog has accidentally disrupted the billion-dollar big fashion marketing machine. And the knock-on effects of that inadvertently creating a threat that could destabilize the entire fashion industry. Because if the analog trend has had any impact on fashion, it's shown that what we're now craving in our lives is also being reflected in what we want from our clothes. And that's something fashion can't give us right now, unless it rewrites the entire foundation of the industry. Let me take you through it and explain what I mean. Before we do, let me say welcome or welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, my name's Katie. I analyze fashion through the lens of culture and sustainability. And if that sounds good to you, then make sure you subscribe to the channel. And also real quick, let me say thank you to the sponsors of this video, Index, who I'm going to be telling you about later. Okay, let's get into it. We're going to start by connecting the anti-algorithm trend, the shift to analog, to the fashion industry. Because as I said, I don't think a lot of people have examined this link yet. A big part of my theory rests on the birth of the analog trend, which really kicked up a storm last year and kind of got to the point where everyone was convinced they were going to be throwing their phones into the ocean at midnight on New Year's. And whilst that obviously didn't happen, time spent on social media has decreased globally. One of the stats I found most staggering was that in 2025, 50% of Gen Z either wanted to quit or reduce their social media time. This is coming from the generation that grew up on the internet. The takeaway from that, and where I see this link to fashion going, is that less people spending time on their phones means that less people are taking fashion advice from the algorithm, which after a decade of Pinterest and TikTok dictating what people wear and how they style it, is actually a massive deal. Fashion has become so ingrained with the For You page that it's almost one and the same. And the entire fashion industry is now built off the power of influencing and buy now, think later, to the point that it might crumble if you remove the driving force at its center. But fashion shifting away from the algorithms becomes almost inevitable when you think about the reasons why people want to distance themselves. For example, AI slop penetrating every corner of the internet and being especially badly received in fashion campaigns. The discourse around influencer fatigue and how tiring it is to constantly be sold something on social media. And kind of tied to this was the big conversation last year around everyone dressing the same. There's smaller indicators like the trend I reported on called wearing not styling, which is hitting back at the pressure to constantly look put together and in your best outfits online. And also bigger indicators like the fact more people are becoming aware that trends often have subconscious political standings that we don't necessarily subscribe to and don't realize we're subscribing to with our dress until it's pointed out to us. Obviously, you also have things outside of fashion, like the growing distrust with big tech and the cost of living crisis, meaning that even if we wanted to, we can't keep subjecting ourselves to constant desire to overconsume. I think all of these reasons have kind of come together and fed the analog trend. And it's not surprising that more of us want to chuck our phones into the sea. It's also not surprising that two of the biggest ideas floating around fashion right now have direct links to the analog trend. The first is the general consensus online that trends are now a low status activity in the post brain rot era, at least, exposing your screen time and suggesting that you only dress for the approval of others. And two, the indie art girl is now back in fashion with her anti-clean girl image and style based off estate sales or hand-me-downs rather than something you could buy at Shein. Putting these two things together kind of show how fashion has evolved in the analog era. Being inspired by anything other than the algorithm is cool now. Showing off that your references are now from a magazine spread, your friendship group, old runway shows, and of course, your own personal style and what it means to you is so much cooler than saying you're wearing this because you saw another influencer wearing it. Don't get me wrong, people are still being inspired by the algorithm, but it's so much more abstract than a shopping influencer giving you an Amazon basic must-have. Instead, it's people sharing their outfits that are inspired by art and music and other creative mediums. Or trends like the customization one I reported on last year that relied on personalization and creativity. Or it's people emphasizing the fact that something is a one of a kind, can't be found anywhere else, or hand-me-down from their grandma, that just shows their wardrobe has something else to it. I think these examples show that the social currency has shifted to showing who you are through clothing rather than what brand you like or who you follow. There's value in having something no one else can, or dressing for yourself rather than virality. Being niche is a blessing. Wearing things again and again is cool, which it always was, but social media didn't like to talk about that. And these things are bad news for fashion. I've mentioned before about the shift towards sentimentality and storytelling coming back into fashion. I think that's why there's this subtle emphasis on brands putting things down the runway that look a little bit worn in, a little bit torn, a little bit distressed in some way. One TikToker phrased a lot of this season's trends as
pieces that basically say, this is not my first season. Something that screams personal, that even if you try, you can't find new, or at least it won't look as cool.
There's clearly a desire for our fashion to tell more of a story about us and where we've been and what these pieces represent to us. And it's clearly something fashion has noticed and desperately tried to manufacture by selling pre-dirtied shirt for 3 figures down the runway because they know they can't put real sentimentality into new clothing. There's a desperation there because they can tell we're losing interest in the never-ending collections and the constant pressure to keep up on social media. And if anything, this analog trend has exposed the ways fashion overly relies on the romanticization and the carefully curated aesthetic of social media to sell us clothes that we don't really want. Taking the algorithm away exposes how fragile the system big fashion has built is and how it relies on us not actually wearing our clothes. And this is kind of where we move from industry trend alert to industry analysis, because I want to dive deeper into what the analog trend exposes about big fashion. First is something we've known for a long time, that the algorithm and big fashion combined is responsible for the accelerated trend cycle that ruined our planet and ruined our wardrobes. Case in point, since the analog movement started trickling into fashion, the trend cycle itself is a lot more abstract than it was pre-fashion TikTok. Less one specific piece from a brand that everyone's buying, and more of a return of the idea of concepts like worn in being a reference point that you can take inspiration from and make your own. I think fashion is almost returning to the trend cycle it had pre-TikTok, and it's part of the reason fashion is now struggling industry-wide, since it's gotten used to that constant overconsumption cycle. The second thing the analog trend has exposed, and I think probably the most important, it's shown us the priorities and the pitfalls of big fashion. Because since the social currency switched to clothes having a story, clothes having more meaning than buying them new this season, we've seen more brands scrambling, desperate, trying to get consumers back. They gave us a glamorized fake version of the realness we're craving so they can sell us more clothes. But they can't cover up the fact that the entire industry is built on us not wearing our clothes. We have to examine how the fashion industry is built, what keeps it going, in order to truly understand why this trend has shaken it as it has. At the center of the industry is the promise that all our problems will be solved if we just buy one more item, whilst the rest of the industry is built around keeping us coming back, never fulfilling that promise of just one more item to keep us reinventing ourselves one blazer at a time. Which brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Index, who are trying to break this vicious cycle in fashion with a business model centered entirely around actually helping you love and wear what you already own. Index is a digital wardrobe app that makes your own closet look just as beautiful as any online store, which gives you that same dopamine hit, but for shopping your own closet. You guys know I'm a big fan of buying less and wearing what you already have. And I love that Index makes it so easy because you can see what you already have right there on your screen. Plan and save outfits so you always have something to wear, and even have fun styling outfits for your friends and your family and other people online. Having this kind of data can show you what actually gets worn, repeated, neglected, or overrepresented in your wardrobe. And I love that unlike pretty much every other fashion app, Index doesn't make money by selling you clothes. It really is all about you and your wardrobe, which is rare. If you're trying to get away from TikTok dictating what you wear, or maybe you're trying to develop your personal style more, then you can basically replace the algorithm with your own personal lookbook. And if you're not sure where to start, you can work with a stylist right there on the app who will help you make the most of your clothes. You can download Index on iOS or Android, and when you sign up, you can use my code Katie Robinson or select my name from the drop down, and you'll get $10 towards expert styling. Okay, but back to the video and the point that I was making, that since the fast fashion business model revolutionized the industry and made it cheaper to buy new clothes rather than repair them, fashion hasn't really bothered on making clothes last. Before, it was a lot more normalized to just own 1 or 2 coats, maybe a handful of t-shirts, a pair of jeans or so, and keep repairing them because you'd spent money and you wanted these things to last. Fashion kind of reluctantly accepted this, and we got things like extra buttons added to our coats in case one of them popped off. Now, there's no more extra button. There's been a noticeable decline in the integrity and the structure of clothing, and no one really expects it to last anymore. And a big part in this shift in our behavior is the fashion marketing machine. Even when more of us became conscious of our clothing consumption, they just switched the narrative into something that sounds better, but is essentially the same thing. Instead of emphasizing how new something was, how on trend it was, they switched to calling it a timeless essential or an investment piece that targeted our desire for something valuable, something we could keep for ages, but didn't really stop us coming back and buying more and more of them. I mean, how many times can a brand release one more essential for our capsule wardrobe before it becomes glaringly obvious that they never care about our wardrobes being finished? In fact, they only promote the feeling that it never will be. The idea of fashion caring about whether something is a timeless essential in your wardrobe is laughable, which is why this wave of meaning coming back into fashion and analog inspo getting you off the algorithm is such a threat to an industry that relies on newness. It's all about volume to them. Brands are rewarded for units sold, not how many times you wear something in your wardrobe. They currently don't have the capacity, let alone the desire, to track our relationship with the clothes they're selling and we're buying, to understand what draws us to a garment, what keeps us wearing it, what makes us repair it when it's broken. Which is why I think it's so important that we figure this out for ourselves. If we're the ones tracking what we're buying, tracking how much we're wearing it, how many times we can style it with something else, then we're going to have a more informed decision about whether something is actually a timeless essential in our wardrobes and whether it's something we want to invest more in the future, or whether it just doesn't work for us, which obviously goes against that impulse spending that fashion wants to encourage in us. And that's why fashion's business model is not centered around this data. They don't want us thinking like this. The fast fashion business model does not know how to monetize the idea of us keeping our clothing, although there are actually a few ways. I think this longing for meaning and a story behind our clothing could easily be turned into an opportunity for brands who could offer things like repairing and customization and personalization to build that story and increase the value of a garment in our eyes, and maybe make it something we would pay more for in the long run. And sure, maybe that would mean brands sell us less new stuff, but we're kind of already heading that way anyway, with the cost of living crisis and the trend cycle slowing down. And the possibility of brands investing early on in the lifetime of a garment rather than just dusting their hands off once it's been checked out could make a lot of sense. One of the already existing examples of this is resale. And brands have already been rushing into the market, lured by the explosion of people getting into secondhand fashion for reasons like price, environmental consciousness, the better quality of vintage. Brands are already seeing this as an opportunity to capture money in a new part of a garment's life cycle. A lot of them have already released their own resale platforms. They're investing in RFID tags, but they're not yet leaning into this as a marketing scheme. And I think that's where they're missing a trick. So far, a lot of the focus on resale has been the price, and that is a big driver. But we know that people want storytelling. They want deeper meaning in clothing, and secondhand is the perfect way to get this. It doesn't hurt that brands are already being pushed into resell by the new waves of legislation that require brands to take responsibility beyond checkout, also known as EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility for my legislation nerds. And this really is my hope, that brands will be forced to slow down their overproduction and rewrite their marketing angles if they want to be able to dodge the hefty fines for overproduction. But we can also hope they'll do it out of the goodness of their hearts, I suppose. I mean, I think any fashion exec that is ignoring the fact that customers are basically demanding a story with their clothing, a meaning that just hasn't been there in fast fashion. And governments are going to literally require that kind of responsibility, is thinking with a short-sightedness that will damn the brand. Yes, this will require major changes to fashion's infrastructure and marketing, but I think the only way fashion is going to start thriving rather than just surviving in the next few years is if they shift their focus from selling fashion to wearing it and putting value back in owning clothing, making it mean something. And with that, I think we've discussed the analog fashion theory enough. I'd love to know your thoughts, whether you think fashion will ever truly embrace the storytelling angle, and how you think brands are going to start coping with analog fashion inspo. Okay, thank you all for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys very soon. Okay, bye everybody.